So if we look in my previous videos, I talk a lot about Paracelsus and his conception of thought and the virtue of thought and the powers behind our own thought. And I think all the time, the thoughts that I'm having, we have a finite amount of thoughts in this world, and you can either believe yourself to your own demise or your own divinity. And I see all of the time talk about manifestation and the power that thought has to bring in abundance for somebody. And I study mysticism a lot, and I study the occult a lot, and this manifestation seems to be like New Age prayer, but not even. I just wanted to, it's a temptation to think, oh, we have the ability to think ourselves into money, and perhaps we do. I'm not saying that this isn't a possibility. In fact, in this video, I'm going to presuppose that it is possible to manifest. So I worked my line of thought down through prayer to manifestation, because something about manifestation on an intuitive sense just didn't sit right with me. And after some study, I think I understand why. So that's the thesis of this video, and so I'm going to start and walk you down my line of what I'm thinking about. What is I'm thinking about? So I started with I was reading From Intellect to Intuition by Alice Bailey, which this was a book written in 1932, and I read in it, prayer plus disciplined unselfishness produces the mystic, which I thought, yes, like in Christian thought, selflessness and servitude and humbleness seems to be the hallmark of prayer. So how did we get to the exact opposite in manifestation? Some thoughts about prayer I have in this book. She quotes Bianco of Siena, who says, "What is prayer but upward turning of the mind to God direct?" And from Bianco as well, "No prayer is needed except to ask for a good state of mind, for health and wholeness of soul." And in the Bible itself, in Matthew 6:28, we have this quoted: "And why take ye thought for raiment? Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin. And yet I say unto you that even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. Wherefore, if God so clothe the grass of the field, which today is and tomorrow is cast into the oven, shall he not much more clothe you, O ye of little faith? Therefore take no thought, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or wherewithal shall we be clothed? For after all these things do the Gentiles seek. For your heavenly Father knoweth that you yea have need of all these things. But seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and all of these things shall be added unto you. Take therefore no thought for the morrow, for the morrow shall take thought for the things of itself. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof." So even this line here, "Consider the lilies of the field, how they grow. They toil not, neither do they spin." Also just emphasizing the the concept of thought, belief, prayer, contemplation, manifestation, even just that alone, the idea indicative of the virtue and power of what our minds are capable of. That's why I'm considering this so much, because it does seem to be very important, but nonetheless, prayer for God alone will, and all things will be received that you need in this life. I think the problem is these people want more. People who are manifesting want more than what they need. But nonetheless, we'll all get there eventually. James Montgomery is quoted in this Alice Bailey book as well, saying, "Prayer is the soul's sincere desire, unuttered or expressed, the motion of a hidden fire that trembles in the breast." Again, just laying importance of what prayer or manifestation, or the importance of that desire of the heart is contemplation. So then I read Friedrich Heiler's essay in Spiritual Disciplines on a history of mysticism, because it lays out a development of contemplation in Christianity, and kind of like the early roots of thoughts of divinity. And he bases it into 3 sections of Jewish prophetism and the Jerusalem cult, in where they lie in history. And the second is the Hellenistic synchronistic mysteries, and the third being Platonic and Neoplatonic mysticism. And his claim is that contemplative piety has been found in Christianity for over 2,000 years. Contemplation being defined by Thomas Aquinas as the simple intuition of divine truth, proceeding from a contemplation as spiritual vision. So the Jewish prophetism and Jerusalem temple cult were prophets who were seeing Yahweh, like Jacob and Moses and Elijah, having visions of Yahweh themselves, and them being told, or being divined down onto them the truth, which made me remember Julian Jaynes' breakdown of the bicameral mind, origin of consciousness, and the breakdown of the bicameral mind, in the sense that if that theory is to be true, our actual brain functioning and like physical placement of the anatomy of the brain being different in a way where contemplation then wouldn't be what contemplation is today, supposedly, where I don't know, like where the Broca's and the Wernicke areas of the brain were placed was closer for a bridge, so that pure auditorial hallucinations would be more common in the brain, and that was how God, or how they perceived God, would communicate to these people. So visual hallucinations, whatever it is, this is the beginning of contemplation of Jesus Christ. In whatever way that they're receiving it, it just made me think of that theory. But then we moved to Hellenistic mysteries, which bridged symbolism into contemplation. Beginning in the New Testament, the mysteries led their devotees from purification to vision to union. Heiler says a showing of the Celtic object enabled the initiate to see the Godhead. So now we're bringing down symbols onto the earth to seek divinity through. Also in Roman Isis cults, they worshipped images of the Godhead. So I'm trying to find a line down to pure visual contemplation, to earthly contemplation, the the history of contemplation in resulting in New Age manifestation today. So anyways, this is still not anywhere near today, but then there's contemplation of Plato and the divine eros, leading the soul upwards from the contemplation of earthly beauty to the absolute reality of true being, eternal truth, goodness, and beauty. So now, and so on after that, all of these Neoplatonic thinkers are. Now we get into a more fuller history of mysticism that I want to go down through. Plato, after Plato is Plotinus, saying that the prerequisite for the vision of God in the soul's kinship and similarity to God, the prerequisite for the vision of God, or this prophetism that people were still looking out to see, was the soul's kinship in the similarity to God, is how I meant to say that. Never, quote, this is in Enneads, never did the eye see the sun unless it had become sun-like. And so I don't know if this is emblematic of Mithras worship and the sun god, but nevertheless, being like God and the soul's kinship to God is what brings divinity. Another quote from Plotinus, but first the soul must detach itself from the unclean and the transitory. It must cast off all veils, just as he who enters the Holy of Holies, or the mystic who enters the imageless. And we're going to see time and time again that image of God and contemplation of God alone throughout history is divinity. And so Plotinus says just here, the transitory world of the earth is unclean and must be detached from. Philo of Alexandria combined the Jewish prophetism and Platonic absolute to write his treatise on the contemplative life. And also during this time, magic was had become a trade in exchange for money. People were divining, or theurgy. They were calling down demons, positive or negative. People were being criminalized for calling down bad demons to attack people. It was a crime, but like this was happening as well. So and Plotinus himself, he did believe in the efficacy of incantations and talismans, but he concludes in the Enneads that life of reason is free from magic. So look, all of this is like magic, and the earthly realm is being mixed into all of this in its own degree that I'm not fully sure if this is like a lot of shit that I'm trying to like gather a small amount of. I'm going to keep going on the history of mysticism. Clement of Alexandria and Origen are synthesizing biblical Christianity and Platonism. Clement's Iromene Theopo, I don't know any Greek, so introduces concept of translating to the soul in love with God, and divination will come with gnosis, or contemplation of God alone. People are concerned with the divinities of their soul. Like, people are concerned with the afterlife. Origen, offering the theological discussion of contemplative prayer. The highest degree of prayer for him was the worshiping of the vision of Jesus with the gnosis of the divine glory. Christian monasticism now comes into picture in the 4th century, with figures like Macarius, Mark the Hermit, Nilus of Sinai, John Climacus, and later Simeon the New Theologian, exemplifying a life lived in constant remembrance of God. And then there's Dionysius the Areopagite, stating God is the inaccessible light that can only be seen in non-seeing and transcends all sensory perception and intellect. So now there's St. Augustine, and this specifically is the first time that I see a differentiation of what prayer can be, at least in my study. And in his book Confessions, he defines prayer being of praise, thanks, and supplication. So this is like the first concept away that I see that isn't just considering God in his image alone to bring what it is that you need. And Saint Benedict of the Benedictine monastery then after that says that contemplation is the profoundest content of prayer. Pope Gregory, a great son of the Benedictine order, had a more cerebral understanding of mysticism, with a lack of exuberance of like miracles, perhaps, or like the ecstatic. Bernard Clairvaux, specifically contemplating the life and passion and death of Jesus Christ, he says to know Jesus crucified, is the kernel of his philosophy. Richard of St. Victor, author of the treatise De Gratia Contemplationis, added a more psychological subtlety within contemplation of Jesus Christ. Francis of Assisi has a more worldly interpretation of contemplation of Jesus. For him, the nature became a transparency of the Creator's beauty and love. Poor, the humble, suffering Jesus became an image of God's self-sacrificing love. Contemplation of Christ's wounds and agony and the stigmata is a symbol of the sacrificing love. And contemplation of that along with nature, so an earthly God speaking through nature, you can contemplate that as well. So not manifestation of acquiring things in an earthly realm, but nature alone in the earthly realm. Martin Luther then he passed through contemplative mystic schools, but his preceptors, St. Augustine, Bernard Clairvaux, Heiler, and the Frankfurt Canon, however, he combined a number of anti-contemplative traits, a moral hostility to the monastic ideal, a lack of understanding of Francis of Assisi and Thomas Aquinas, and bitter animosity toward the Dionysius Areopagite. There were still contemplative traits in there, but he introduced a lot of anti-contemplation into his school of thought. However, mystics were still birthed out of this, like Jacob Boehme, who was more in running counter to Luther's orthodoxy. So look, today I have conversations with people all the time, talking to them about why they turned away from Catholicism or Christianity. Because although you go to church and there's contemplative aspects in church, just on an anecdotal note, talking to people who, or like my own experience going to faith formation classes you can't ask questions, you can't contemplate. It's very dogmatic. It's far from the history of contemplation. Those aspects still exist, but the history of it today is, again, anecdotally, that there is no contemplation. There are no questions to be asked. You need to believe. It's just dogmatic Christianity. So for manifestation to be as popular as it is today, first of all, if you're manifesting abundance in this earthly realm, I believe that is an atheistic prospect. Anyways, because if you understand that there is an afterlife and this life is illusory, there's just, there would be no need to take the time to be manifesting abundance. But also, the reason that this works is that manifestation is tuning your energy in alignment with a frequency. Essentially, here the differentiation is that there is no personification of Jesus Christ, but that the creator, whatever it is, so maybe it's not necessarily atheistic, it's a frequency. And you're tuning yourself to this frequency, okay? So, at least that's like the Gnostic idea, the Gnostic understanding of God is that it is consciousness. This is how I see it, and that Christianity personifies that consciousness and makes it more relatable to the human experience with human symbolism. And manifestation is like using magic to manipulate this consciousness / frequency of existing. This, in my own intuitive thought, if I'm considering contemplation of Jesus Christ versus manifesting abundance, the latter weighs in me way heavier, and I wanted to probe at that to understand why it is that I feel that way. And look, energy has mass. I do believe that thoughts can weigh you down to your own demise or elevate you to your own divinity, and intuitively manifesting feels like a demise. And if our souls are getting weighed in the afterlife, ancient Egypt style, against Mot, the heart and the feather, a life of manifesting is going to weigh you down, because there's a finite amount of materials in the world. And if you're manifesting that money, you're taking it away from somebody else and saying you need more. And it's I don't see it as being manifesting enough money for rent. People are manifesting $1 million. And maybe this isn't across the board. I'm sure there's different forms of manifesting, but it's an amount of overabundance. And it's selfishness, and it's taking away from others, assuming that this is a real possibility that can happen. It goes against the history of mysticism. It goes against what God is. And I was also thinking, like, so if we combine this contemplative thought, contemplation of God with this frequency consciousness that exists for manifestors, it's like to contemplate that God would be like contemplating binaries, like numbers, like what is frequency? But no, the purest form of contemplation for manifestors, for people who believe in this frequency or consciousness God, is meditation. It's stripping away of the ego and the earthly desires and seeing the true origin of God when all of that is away. In no case is the result to manifest wealth and abundance for yourself in no proper sense of mysticism or even Gnostic beliefs in God or consciousness. So yeah, I believe manifestation to be a complete perversion, atheistic, complete disregard for the totality of what existence is. And I think meditating on your own consciousness, whatever it is, how you contemplate divinity, to not just to be grateful and to maybe live in the image of God, or whatever that means to you. Nowhere should you be trying to acquire more than your neighbor. Maybe you can manifest that the world gains more together or something, but putting yourself up on that totem pole alone, acquiring all these earthly things, is just not the path. It's not the path. And who am I, right, to say that what is and isn't the path? But I just can't see in history where that ever came into being. When it comes to the evolution of contemplating God's existence. So yeah, that's just my thought on it, and I know I'm only scratching the surface, and maybe this came off a bit confused or all over the place, but hopefully I get better at communicating my ideas, and it's not easy for me either. I think I'm not smart, I'm just curious. So if I hope that I can get my ideas across in a constructive way, but I am aware of my capabilities. So I'd like to hear what else people think about this. So if anybody has an idea, can point me in some kind of direction, let me know. So yeah, okay, thank you for listening.